Hey everyone, welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Novatemi, and this is episode 2 in my art tutorial series. Today we'll be talking a little bit about guidelines, how to get started with your actual physical drawing, how to find reference images, your art style, that sort of thing. We'll be going over pretty much all the basics of actually starting to learn to construct character drawings and that sort of thing. This video is a little late. I did start this like 2 months ago, and things in my life got crazy. I didn't even know if I'd be able to make this video, but I'm glad that I'm making it now. So yeah, I'd like to jump right into it. This is going to be a long one. I apologize in advance. It's just the nature of it. We're going to be going over a lot today. This video won't be super edited. It'll be kind of like the last one, so bear with me while I yap. I do have a script of sorts this time. I have a list of things I'm gonna go over at least. So yeah, let's jump right into it. I'm not gonna waste your time. I just wanted to say, hey, welcome back. This one was requested by a lot of people. It's actually the reason why I wanted to make this series, because a lot of people, they have the equipment, they have all the setup, but they don't know where to start. It's just so daunting and overwhelming, and when, you know, they try to draw a character, they can't seem to really figure it out, and all the tutorials online are not very helpful. They're, you know, for levels above basic drawing, or they just, you know, assume that you have like an art school type knowledge of drawing, or they're taught in a very, like, you know, classroom sort of way, which isn't really my thing. I am self-taught. If you're new here, hi. I'm an artist. I am freelance. I do art for a living, and I've been doing it for quite a while. I've been doing it full-time for about 5 years, and I'm completely self-taught. Never been to art school. Can't stand school. So I wanted to make a tutorial mostly for like friends and stuff, about how to do stuff like guidelines and break characters down into simple shapes and stuff like that, so that drawing is easier and you can actually get to drawing the characters that you like without having to do, you know, 100 hours of drawing 3D boxes or whatever. Thank you very much for watching, and let's jump right into it. Alright, so the first thing we're going to be doing before we actually put pen to paper is finding a reference photo. Finding a reference photo, especially when you're new to drawing, is one of the most important things that you can do. Drawing from reference is going to be a lifesaver and give you an opportunity to really learn anatomy, how to break things down into shapes, and all that. The best places to find reference photos, it kind of depends on the kind of reference photos you're looking for, and so really quick I'm going to go over the different types. The first type of reference photo is the real picture. These are very easy to find on places like Pinterest. We will be using all three of the ones that I show here to draw on to actually show you how it works. Real photos are a great reference, especially if you want to learn to draw in a more realistic or semi-realistic style. And we'll be going over like the differences in art styles and stuff a little later in this video. Real photos are probably the best thing to work with when you're first starting out, because you know that the pose is going to be, you know, physically possible. It's about as accurate as you can get because it is a literal real person. These days it may be a little difficult to find photos like this that aren't AI, depending on where you look. Always remember to remain vigilant, and we will be talking about using AI as a reference a little bit later, because that's a thing that people are talking about recently and I wanted to weigh in on it. The second kind of reference photo that you'll probably find are these sketchy like pose references, where the characters don't have a lot of actual details filled in. It's just kind of a general anatomy guide, and what we'll actually be doing when we create guidelines is similar to this, so this just kind of lets you skip the first bit. I like to personally redraw the guidelines over these kind of guides, and we'll go over that as well. The third type of really common reference image that people use are bases, and bases are something that has been like debated about since like the beginning of fucking time. Like whether or not it's okay to use them, whether or not it's lazy, if it, like, you know, stunts your growth. if it's a good tool for young artists, like that kind of thing. And we will be talking a little bit about it when we get to the section where we use drawing bases. I'll also be talking about using 3D models, which you can do both in Clip Studio Paint and on external websites and stuff like that. I'll probably link some in the description of this video just to check out, so make sure that you look at that once we're done here. And I'll be looking at all of these and talking about how like you can use them. And I think I'll start with the real photo because that's going to jump into our main meat of this video, which is mostly breaking down people into shapes so that you can replicate them. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to get started with that. Alright, so let's get started with drawing up our guidelines based on an actual reference photo. I did change the reference photo I was going to use. I was going to use the one in the earlier clip, but it had a really weird angle problem that I thought wouldn't translate well for the tutorial. So I chose a really basic photo here. This one is also made for people to draw off of. I wanted one that was front facing, very simple to follow, that sort of thing. So I will, this is also, this is a photo specifically made for people to draw from. It still has a watermark on it, just ignore that. A lot of the time, these reference photos made for drawing, the subjects in the photos will be sort of scantily clad. That's mostly because you want to see the anatomy in the drawing. That's kind of the whole point. Like it's kind of like when you go to a figure drawing class and you draw someone who's like butt booty ass naked. It's sort of like that, but it's a bit less nude. So this might seem scantily, dubious, but this is just a pretty standard reference photo. So anyway, we'll be breaking this down into simple shapes so that we can draw from it. And to start with that, I'm going to show you how simple it is to actually translate this very complex shape into simple parts that you can easily recreate yourself with pretty much any photo. Again, I did change the photo I was using because it was awkward. But I chose this one because it's pretty simple. So I lowered the opacity here so that you can kind of see what we're drawing on top of this without it sort of being muddy. So we'll start with the head. You always want to start drawing with the head, no matter what you're actually drawing. If you're drawing a person, always start with the head. The size of a person's head is going to determine the size of the rest of the body, no matter what art style you're working in. It's very important to draw the head first so that you know the general scale and then work down as you go. So we'll be starting with the head. Now, your head shape is going to change depending on your art style. If you're drawing realism, it's a very complex shape. If you're drawing like a more anime art style, like my art, it's a bit more simple, but it really also depends on individual preference. Some art styles are more realistic than others. Some are completely abstract. If you're someone that draws just like a circle head, that's fine. But if you're someone with like a more detailed art style, then obviously it's going to be a little different. Generally speaking, when you're using a photo reference, that's the kind of reference that will be best for a more realistic art style because you're able to copy some of the anatomy that's shown here. And a lot of the time, when you use these references, you'll be sketching directly on top of the photo instead of like off to the side. Now, this is different from tracing. When people talk about tracing and how bad tracing is, they're generally not talking about what we're doing here. When someone's talking about tracing, usually they mean tracing artwork and like stealing artwork. But a lot of the time they also mean like, if I was tracing this, I would like draw directly over the eye and like the nose and, literally every single detail here without being transformative of it at all. But that's not what we're doing in this video. We're not tracing, we are copying the general anatomy and then turning it into our own thing, which is what you want to do with photos like this. So the head, I always start off with like a nice circle, no matter what, and after that you can kind of determine where your jaw is going to be, but for the sake of simplicity, I'm going to draw a straight line that kind of connects to this little edge of the circle here, and then sort of bring it over like this, and then back up. And it's going to create this weird sort of shape that's sort of like this. It goes down, and then you have like a bit of a jawline, and then it goes back up. Obviously, this is not completely copying this woman's jawline. That's kind of the point. You're not aiming to completely copy all the facial features from this person, just the general form. This is a good, reference for the size of the head. Stuff like, perfecting your jawline and your facial features, that all comes up to your style and all that. This is just generally breaking down into simple shapes. So this is really 2 shapes here. Just gonna outline that. And usually I will also draw a line that follows the curvature of the head here to show where the center of the face is. So it'll follow like that perfect center line of the head that will show you which direction the head is facing, and sort of how things will follow that down the body. So after that, obviously next up would come the neck, and this part we can kind of copy a little closer to the reference photo, because necks are a very a part of the body that changes shape very closely with your pose, because of the muscles in your shoulder and this sort of shoulder blade area here. It tends to pull and stretch with your head as you move it. So there are some parts of the body that we can copy a little more closely, some that we'll be more loose with. The neck is something that you can be closer with just because it's so specific. But I like to end my neck shape in a little sort of triangle, almost like a bust sculpture, that kind of thing, where it would stop here. So after that, this is where we're going to get a little more loosey-goosey with it. And if you want to, you can also make a center line here. And that center line is not going to follow the chin line. This is just the center of your neck, generally speaking. You don't really have to draw that. So next up, we are going to be doing the torso. And the torso is interesting because it's actually segmented into 3 simple parts. You can kind of see it here, how there are 3 different distinct shapes that make up the torso. Mainly, you have your upper torso, this sort of bust area, and you can see the curvature here, how it sort of goes along here. You can kind of connect it up like this. It almost kind of follows the lines of her shirt as well. But this is generally perfectly, actually. The top she's wearing is perfect for this. This is your upper, your bust and your upper back part of your torso shape. After that, it kind of goes into this ball shape here. It's going to be a bit rounded. I like to literally just draw a ball because this little midway part of your torso is going to be the connector between the top and the bottom, and the position of the top and the bottom pieces can be so varied that I like to just kind of put a ball here, almost like the joint of a doll. There are some dolls that have this ball for the midsection that kind of joins the top and the bottom. When you're creating guidelines, it does kind of feel like you're drawing a doll, which I think is very helpful. We'll also be following this sort of line down the center of the body. After this, we connect, you can kind of outline this outside bit here, but we're connecting the midsection to the hips. Usually this will go out a bit. This is sort of an interesting shape that we're going to be doing here. We can kind of follow the bottom of this ball here. We're going to be creating almost an underwear-like shape, kind of like the actual underwear she has on, but higher up. You can follow the inseam of the crotch area to create this sort of it almost looks like a high-waisted underwear here that we've drawn. This is your basic hip shape. This will not change. Well, I mean, it will change, but it's always a consistent shape. It's not something that really stretches and pulls. It just kind of changes angle. So it's not very a musculature thing. This is just how it sits over the bones of your hips and all that. So this will change. These shapes will change depending on the body type you're drawing. Typically, if you're drawing a character who's a bit heavier, you would use sort of rounder shapes for this bit and sort of work around those rounder shapes to create a more sort of curvy and plush body type. But following directly off this image, we won't be doing that today just because that's not the body type that this person has. I almost said character. This person's a real person. After that, the thighs can basically be broken up into 2 cylinders with a little ball joint at the knees. I like to go straight across. This area is dead zone that we'll fill in later, so don't worry too much about that. If you really want to, you can add 2 more balls here just to act as little doll joint connectors. Thinking of it like a doll, the way dolls are put together with the joints as balls and stuff can really help in visualizing how things fit together. Generally speaking, like if you've ever seen those little posable wooden mannequins, they're also built in the same way. I think it's just easy to help understand like how hinges of the joints work and stuff like that. Just think of it like, doll limbs, like articulated doll limbs. We're going to be drawing a sort of tapered cylinder here. It's basically just a cylinder shape that goes, it's a bit wider at the top and a bit smaller at the bottom. Don't go too dramatic with this unless you have like a really stylized art style, because it's going to look a little unnatural. It shouldn't go down like, you don't want a thigh that's like this, right? Because that's going to look very odd. Unless you're drawing like an anthro character, then you can sometimes get away with that. But if you're drawing a human character, you want it to be tapered but not like crazy different. After that, your knee kind of just goes right in the front there, following the front. You can even add another line to show you exactly where the front end is for this thigh. Then you can kind of basically just create the same thing, but this is a longer shape. The back of the leg has this interesting curve to it. You can see it really clearly here, actually, where it kind of goes like this. You'll only see that on the back of the leg. When you're looking at a leg straight forward, it will look a lot more straight. But here we'll draw just a little bit in the back, and then that kind of goes like that down that way. This image does not have shoes or feet in it. A lot of the time you won't be drawing like completely full body, but I'll show you how to break down hands and feet in a few minutes, so don't worry too much about that. And we can do the same thing with the other thigh. We're basically just once again following this curvature, kind of tapering it a little bit at the bottom. And you notice how I don't completely like perfectly follow all these shapes. That's definitely intentional, because we're not trying to trace every single element of this person. We want it to be its own unique drawing. And one thing we will do after we're done getting down the basic form is we will change this a little bit to be more unique, so that it doesn't feel like a one-to-one copy from the original photo, because you definitely don't want it to be a one-to-one copy. And this will be basically the same shape as the other one. It does have that interesting ridge here, because we're looking at the curve of the leg a bit more from the front, whereas this one you see it a bit more from the side, that sort of thing. So you have your little balls for your knees. We will be going back to those later. So we're going to move back up to the shoulders and basically do the same thing as the legs, just in a different spot. We'll be adding 2 balls. These balls are important. I do recommend you draw these. You don't have to do these ones. I would recommend you draw these ones. This will kind of determine where the shoulders are. And this person sort of has like a broader shoulder, but in most sort of stylized art styles, you won't have shoulders quite like this. It does completely depend on personal preference, though. Usually I have my shoulder balls a little closer to the torso, so it might look a little different here, but don't worry too much about it. And you'll be doing pretty much the same thing you did with the thighs. It's a shape that's a little larger on the top, and it sort of tapers down. These ones are in more of an angle, which will be kind of interesting. Now your elbows are also interesting. From this angle, we won't be drawing the elbows because it's not quite visible. I would usually put something maybe right here, but you can see on the reference that that's not correct. The elbow is actually hidden in both of these, because it would be around this line on the other side of the arm. So we won't be drawing any balls for the elbows here. Now usually I like to start either up here or by the wrist and kind of work my way up. It depends on the angle. I usually like working from the wrist, and I will sometimes make things taper off a little bit more around the wrist just to really emphasize it. This is also a stylized thing, doesn't necessarily have to be perfect. We will just kind of be doing this basic shape. I think it has a nicer shape to it, just from a shape language point of view. Now for hands are the bane, I feel, of a lot of artists, but I think a lot of people really just haven't found ways to break hands down to make them more approachable. Obviously hands are a very complex shape. You have all the little fingers and stuff, but things can be broken down pretty easily, and I'll take a little tangent for a second to show that. So your hands are basically made up of it's all just shapes, but it's kind of closer clustered together. But we always start off with some kind of square. Some places will also tell you to draw this sort of trapezoid shape. This is also very good, but it's a little more complex. This is mostly done for like the thumb placement, but for now we'll be doing the square method because it's the most simple and I think it's the most easy to remember. Also, breaking it down into simpler shapes will help you understand it while you're still learning to create shapes in a very kind of messy way that looks cohesive. So what I typically do a lot of the time, my little hack personally is I break it down into your pointer finger and then the rest of your fingers, which usually don't go too far apart from each other unless you're working on a more complex pose. And then I like to, your thumb starts at the bottom of your hand, not like way up here or whatever, and it sort of has this like single hinge to it where it's like this. Your thumb technically does have more joints, but it's sort of different from the rest of your fingers. And then there is a ball here for your palm. And this is like a very basic hand shape. You can draw this shape in pretty much any hand pose and then refine it, like drawing the individual fingers and figuring all that other stuff out later. I like this method. This usually helps me get down my pose pretty well. But if you want something that's a little more detailed, like maybe you have a pose kind of like this over here where your fingers are doing a lot of different things, I'll show you how you can do a pose like this. So once again, we'll be starting with your square. You can see it follows the shape of the hand here. And then after that, we're going to be breaking down the fingers into different joints. So your fingers are basically like made up of 3 ovals. And those 3 ovals can bend, on a hinge sort of, following your knuckles here, right? So what we'll be doing, you can also do this with little cylinders, which a lot of people find helpful. This is usually the shape that you'll see. You'll see it in our sketchy reference that we have here. They've done it in cylinders, so this is kind of the same thing that we're doing here. Oops, oh, that's not right. Where'd it go? Okay, sorry. The ball, you can see where the palm is here, and then the ball comes up into 1 cylinder and then 2 cylinders, and this one has a rounded tip where the thumb would be. Now, this is wrapping around an object. You can see there's a handle of a sword here, so it's actually a bit of interaction with a thing, not just like a basic hand shape. I will rotate my canvas sometimes because it helps me. But you're basically just drawing those same cylinders. You see here, it's bent, so you can only see some of it, but all 3 cylinders are there. As long as your 3 cylinders are there, you're probably good. Just make sure that they're all around the same size. Your 3 segments of your finger, if you look at your hands right now, they're actually just about perfectly evenly sized. If you try looking at like the bottom of your hand, like your palm side, and look at the creases of your finger, because that's where your knuckles are on the back, and you'll see that they're about the same length. Maybe the top one is a little shorter because it's rounded, but your fingers are pretty much perfectly even. So you just, as long as your fingers don't look like, they're like this, but then they're like this, then you're probably fine. Just make sure that they're even, like relatively. Your bottom one can be a little longer if you want, depends on the angle you're going for, but generally speaking, you're fine. Another reason why it's nice to work from reference is because you can break down complex things like fingers into these basic shapes, but this should help you, relatively speaking. Once you get better at, drawing hands, you can kind of bang this out really fast. Another thing, that brings me to another point. What I've just done here in a few minutes will probably take you like an hour the first time you do it. Don't let that discourage you. You're definitely not bad at drawing. Things like this take a lot of time. I'm probably going way too fast for you. You'll probably have to watch this back a few times, especially if you're trying to follow along. These are things that take time. The muscle memory of learning to do guidelines takes a lot of time, and that's okay. So, take your time with it. Don't worry about rushing. I'm trying to do this as efficiently as possible so that it will save you some time, but obviously some things are, hard to do that with. I'm basically just doing the same thing with the hands here. This time I am freehanding it, so I'm not using the cylinders, because I can see the way that the curves are. If you follow the shapes, you can kind of get it down pretty quickly without having to worry too much about it. and it doesn't have to be perfect. If you still need your cylinders, you can definitely use them, but you don't have to. And yeah, we've basically broken down these hand shapes pretty effectively. You can use a very similar method for the foot. I absolutely hate drawing feet. I think that everyone who complains about drawing hands should draw feet for 10 hours. They might cry. I do not have the makings of a foot fetish artist, unfortunately. But generally, it's kind of the same thing as the hands, only you're using a longer rectangle shape, and then your toes, typically you have one larger toe, and then a bunch of smaller toes, or something sort of similar to this. From the top, this is like a top-down perspective. From the side, you have the ball of your foot, that's where your heel is, and it sort of slopes down like this into this triangle shape, and then your toes kind of stick out of the end there. Now there is like a second ball here, kind of curves up and then back down and then around. It's a very complicated shape compared to the hands, which seem very simple in comparison. I'm not good at drawing feet. I usually avoid it when I can. But it is the same basic, basic structure. I definitely am not good at like articulated toes and stuff, but it's the same thing as the fingers. They're just like a different sort of stubby shape usually. So relatively speaking, this is about done, and it might not look like it, but watch what happens when I flick this off. You'll see that we actually have a pretty good outline of this character. Now, a lot of the original features are gone, and we have to connect some things. So this is usually the last part of doing your guidelines. You'll see that there's some gaps here. We can connect some of this stuff up by just following the natural curvature of the body that's already there. Like, for example, these shoulders, you can see that they would probably connect like this, and then there would be some kind of ball here. My shoulders are a little too small, that's okay. You know, you're kind of creating this rounded shape, and you're basically there. You kind of just have to go back and erase some things until you get a nice, natural body shape. Another thing that a lot of people get stuck on is, like, boobs. If it's not obvious from my PNG tuber, I draw a lot of boobs, so don't panic. And no, not all the boobs I draw are gigantic. That's just how I be. But generally speaking, boobs are pretty simple. It depends on the size that you're drawing. The larger you go, the more complicated it is generally. But with like normal sized chest, you're pretty much, it kind of boils down to like a simple teardrop shape, where it gets heavier towards the bottom and more rounded, and they'll sort of fit on the body that way. What I like to do is I like to draw circles for the round part of the chest, and then connect them into that teardrop shape, sort of like this. And it's going to look a little strange, but once you kind of clean it up, it'll look more natural, and you can draw things around that. So that's kind of generally how I do a chest, at least for like on a feminine character. Drawing dudes is a bit more complicated, I think, because they use a lot more like boxy shapes, generally with like masculine anatomy. It's a bit less curvy, not as many like round shapes. I think round shapes are easier to work with, which is why I think drawing like girls and feminine characters tends to be easier. I have like, I hate when art tutorials are like, men are angular and women are round, because it can go either way. There are definitely a lot of curvy men and a lot of boxy women. There's nothing wrong with that. Obviously, absolutely nothing wrong with that. It's important to actually have some sort of, stylistic change in like the way that you draw your body types and everything. So generally speaking, don't make all of your women curvy like this. Like, you can have women with different body types, and I will go into how to draw different body types probably another time. Most people draw pretty basic, like average looking bodies in their artwork, but drawing different body types, like drawing very curvy characters, is a whole different thing. I draw a lot of curvy characters, as well as a lot of like big buff dudes. So I'll definitely be talking a little bit about that. But generally speaking, I'm not going to draw the sword here, really. I just like kind of sketch it down from the general shape of the sword, because I don't really care about it. But generally speaking, this is a really good starting point. So once you get to this point, once you have the actual like sort of doll of the character down, you can actually stop using your original reference if you want, and you can move on from this point doing completely original stuff. So now that you have your character's sketch down, you can basically use this similar to how we'd use something like this. We've basically just created one of these. The one that I've done is a little bit more detailed with certain parts because I wanted it to be clear how things connected, but we've pretty much created a structure, and this is how you would do it from a photo reference. After this, we'll be talking about this sort of thing. Since we basically just drew this, now I can actually work with this. Whenever I find one like these that someone else has drawn, I like to personally go over it and redraw it myself because I don't like to use someone else's sketch. I want to make sure that I'm doing as much original work as possible whenever I'm using a reference photo like this because I don't want to be stealing other people's work. These are meant to be drawn over, but there's a big difference between drawing over it and making it your own and tracing it. And this is a good segue to talk about bases, which is where we'll be using this one just really quick, in and out. So bases are something that's been contested, again, since the beginning of time. Very controversial in the art community, and it has been for a while, though discourse has kind of died down these days. Back in the olden times, the DeviantArt base curse was big. A lot of young artists in particular will use bases before they learn to draw stuff like this themselves because they don't understand how to use guidelines, and so they don't really know how to draw characters like this. There are some things you can do with bases. There are ways to use bases constructively, but there's also a lot of ways to use them that's not productive and won't really help you out. So, for example, if you were to just take this photo, like imagine this is black and white or even skin toned, God forbid, like some of the old, DeviantArt type bases are. If you were to take this and literally just try to like draw on top of it, there's a good chance that your artwork is going to clash because, so much of the actual features of this character are already drawn out, and it's going to look really weird and stiff. My art might not be the best example because I do draw in an anime style, but let's say, for example, you're someone who's pretty new to drawing. You don't know how to draw hair, right? So maybe you're like, oh, well, hair is just kind of like this, right? And then maybe it comes down like that. And maybe it's like that kind of. See how much that clashes? Because it's like you're using a completely different brush, a completely different style from the original. It's not going to look quite right, especially if you try to paint it on top of that and you don't know how to paint. And so it's going to look like very awkward. Maybe you won't, it's going to be really obvious that you're using a base for one. It's not going to be cohesive. And it's probably not going to be very good looking, and it's not going to be what you wanted. Like, you might have pictured something really nice when you saw the original base, but once you put all your stuff onto it, it's probably not going to look great. Another problem that I have is when people use these in a quote-unquote correct way and they draw over it, the whole thing, the problem is bases like this that have like the facial features already filled out, I find that when I draw on stuff like this, I will accidentally like copy the actual facial features and like the other person's art style who drew this. Some small things like the body proportions, the size of the head, and even like the way that the eyes are structured. Like here, this is very much like sort of similar to how I do it, but it's a lot more like traditional anime. If I draw over it, I can make it a little more my style, but it's always going to have this like look that the rest of my art doesn't have. Like these eyes are very rounded, the face would be very like sort of odd for my style. Because of this huge dome head. A lot of anime has this thing where they have these huge heads, and you're meant to draw hair on top of them, but a lot of the time hair is meant to be like bigger than the head in the anime style, so it just, these bases like don't really work very well if you don't know how to like work with the anatomy. It's not going to fit your style. It's going to be obvious that you traced, or that you're working off of a base. And a lot of the time when people work off of bases, they're directly tracing and they're not making anatomical decisions to like change things. So I don't really recommend using a base like this, where it has a very distinct art style. It has like characters' facial features already on it. I've seen some where it's literally like a full drawing and they just don't have hair, and the only thing you're supposed to do is add hair to it, which is like it's gonna just result in a bunch of people making characters with the base that all look exactly the same, because you're not creating your own unique facial features. You're not learning how to do that. You're just kind of following along. There's a big difference between using a base and doing like an art study, and I will talk about art studies at the end of this video and how you can do them. But generally speaking, if you're trying to find a reference, I don't recommend using one like this unless you draw in like a super similar art style, because it's just not going to look like your art. It's going to look very strange. So going back to this example, this is actually a perfect example of a quote-unquote base that you can draw off of, because it has like a general shape. It's sort of vague, it's sort of messy, and so you're not tempted to like one-for-one copy it. You're meant to draw on top of this and use it as just a guide for like the pose. But it doesn't have the facial features, meaning that you have to draw your own, and so you'll better learn how to do that. You know, how to create characters with the kind of faces that you like, and how to get the sort of outcome that you probably desire for stuff like this. So what I'll be doing here is really similar to what I would have done with our other image, the one that we just drew a few minutes ago. I will be lowering the opacity of this. I'm actually going to change the size of my canvas so that it's cropped correctly. There we go. I moved it to a larger canvas size. I like to work in like a, you know, between a 1000 by 1000 pixel to 3000 by 3000 pixel canvas. If you feel like your art is small and crusty, literally just make your canvas bigger. It like changed my life. I personally, I always start with a 3000 by 3000 pixel canvas with like a high DPI, because I like my art to be, if it turns out really good and I want to like make it into a print or something, I always start with like a big old canvas and a good resolution. It'll make a big difference. Like, I promise. I used to draw so small and everything was so like pixelated and crusty. It was just nasty. But working on a big canvas will change your life. It's worth. On a reference like this, you can usually just start sketching your details right on top of it. If this is something that's very different from your style, again, I would recommend that you sketch over it and use your new sketch as a guide, sort of like what we did before. But for the sake of simplicity, I'll just be drawing on top of this for now to show kind of how that next step would go. I always start off with the face, personally, specifically the eyes. You can see that this person drew a sort of single sketch line here, but now would be a good time to talk about face guidelines. And I've made another guide about that somewhere, but I'll probably make a more detailed one in the future, like how I specifically draw faces. But generally, this is a good starting point. The purpose of these lines, right? This middle one is to show you the center of the face. This one here that goes across is meant to show you generally where your eyes should go. And then this upper one is either the top of the eyes, where the eyes shouldn't extend past, or an eyebrow line to show you like where your eyebrows go. Personally, I think this is a bit small. This could also be like where the center of your eyes are. Everyone's guidelines are a little different. How you do your guidelines kind of depends on your art style and what you prefer. I'm actually going to redraw these guidelines to how I like to draw them to kind of show you how I do it. So I will keep the center line. I'm actually going to draw this in blue so it contrasts so you can see it clearly. I will keep the center line. The center line's always important. And then usually I will also have a bottom for the eye and a top for the eye. My art style has larger eyes. I have like a very anime inspired art style, so mine's not as realistic. The eyes should end around the midpoint of this jaw curve thing, and then they should definitely stop some point along here towards the chin. You don't have to do the thing where you have one eye in between your other two eyes. Again, it completely depends on your art style. Art tutorials that tell you that you need to have like the width of one eye in between your two eyes, that's only for like realism, and some people apply it to stylized work, but it doesn't make a lot of sense to me personally. Here, because the head is curved, the outer eye is going to look a lot smaller, and so you're going to have to kind of change your guidelines to fit the new curvature. After that, I like to add one more line for where my eyebrows will go. They'll go in this box in between these two lines here. Another thing I like to do is figure out where your nose is going to go. My art style, I don't really draw noses. I kind of just do like this little thing like that to where like the bridge of the nose would be. But for the sake of the tutorial, I'll also add a nose box. Wherever your nose is going to end, usually it's midway between these lines here. I would put it around right here. You can always just put a line there, like wherever you want your nose to end. But if you want to, you can also create like a nose box to kind of show you where the nose shouldn't extend past. And then your mouth is going to be halfway between what remains from the nose to the chin. So it'll be about there. And this is kind of generally where your facial features should go. Another thing you can do is mark out your hairline so you know where the hair shouldn't extend past on the forehead. I wish I learned that sooner. I was drawing some real like fuck-ass hairlines for a while. You can draw a line following the curvature of the head starting at the base of the ears and then kind of go down to like where your sideburns would be and sort of just create like a widow's peak sort of shape like this. And this is your hairline. You shouldn't draw your hair like starting like this. No skin should be showing above this line. So you have like a nice forehead to head ratio. An example of how not to draw on this would be like to start way up here, because then you have this like area down here that should be covered by your hairline, and instead it looks like your character's hair is like way too high up on their head and they're like going bald. So you should at least start here when you're creating your hair strands so that nothing goes above that line. So this is generally how I lay out face guidelines. I'm going to lower the opacity of those. I don't actually use them that often because I draw so many faces that I don't need them anymore. I'll still use some very basic ones like what's actually on this model here. But for you, especially starting out, I would always recommend starting with guidelines. Just lower the opacity, draw on top of them, stay within the boundaries of your boxes when you're doing your eyes and stuff. I'll be drawing like a very simple sort of closed eye thing here, just so I don't have to go all into face stuff right now. Just sketch this out. And if it doesn't perfectly fit in the box, but it looks better, that's fine too. Sometimes your boxes can be wrong, but your eyes can be right. And it will get easier to create the sort of shapes that you want over time. I will probably make a separate tutorial on specifically how I draw, like my eyes and my facial features and my style, but you don't have to draw the same way as me. I don't want this to be like a learn how to draw in my art style kind of series. So I'm trying to find stuff that like generally works for most people's styles. Stuff like using like just guidelines and doing it how you want, like breaking things down into basic shapes. Those are universal things across all art styles, whether you're doing realism or anime or whatever. But generally speaking, you can kind of just do it however the hell you want, really. It doesn't matter that much. You see, once I remove the guidelines, everything is kind of in the right place. If it's a little off, you can always use your selection tool, go to transform, and then move it. You can also use things like the warp tool, which is a lifesaver, in order to just kind of gently nudge things around. It'll kind of change the shape of the face as you do it. You're kind of just warping it in general until it looks decent. And then once you're pretty much, you've got a good idea of how the face looks, you can always adjust things after to make last minute things, changes until it's kind of how you want. So this is like fine. It could be better, but I'm just doing this really quick for the sake of the tutorial. So that's generally how I use my face guidelines, and then you can kind of go from there. If I kept the hairline guideline, I could move on from that as well. But generally speaking, you're kind of just drawing off of this and stuff. I'll talk about stuff like clothes and hair in a little bit, because hair has its own guidelines that I need to look something up for. But I'll show you how I structure hair in the next part. So I'll see you then. So the last thing I want to talk about before we move on to the hair and how to draw clothes and stuff like that is how to draw from a 3D model. And I'm just going to run over this really quickly because it's very similar to drawing from a photo, which we've already done. So when you draw from a 3D model, you have two options basically. If you're using Clip Studio Paint, you can use this this thing that's built right into Clip Studio Paint. I have it on the little drop down menu. You'll see there's like a bunch of stuff. It has all your materials you've downloaded. I usually keep all my body type stuff in this body type folder. I like to create specific body types for characters so that I can reuse them in future artwork if I want to create my own pose for something. These days, I don't create a lot of my own poses from scratch because I'm really bad at it. I'm trying to get better with it, but usually I go off of a reference photo instead, which is one of the reasons why I recommend it so much. I have this really simple body type I made for a character I work a lot with in commissions. So you can see that Clip Studio Paint, you kind of drag and drop it, and then you have this like cool 3D like editor. There's all these different tools up here. Your main tool, which is selected right here, it lets you rotate the camera when you hold down and drag around. This one up here will let you zoom in and out. And then this one lets you just kind of move around in the 3D space without rotating your character. So there's some other stuff here too. This is mostly to move the character around in the 3D space, but you won't need that most of the time. What you can basically do is you can kind of line them up however you want. If you click on them, you're able to actually manipulate their joints, so you can actually move them like this, and you can create your own poses with this. So like, you know, if I really want a character with their arm raised, I can do that. And you can even do special stuff with the hands. You can manipulate the individual fingers to get like your hand pose you want. If you're looking for a specific hand pose, you can always do something like that. It's very helpful. I've used it for things like combat poses, holding weapons, you know, other complex stuff. Clip Studio Paint actually has its own preset poses that you can also download. I've got like a bunch of them. I think I used this one in the last video, where you drag and drop them onto the character and it moves them into the pose automatically. This is like a cute, silly, feminine pose. I think I actually used this for the concept art for the character that's my PNG tuber. I used it for her concept art because she's very bubbly. But you can kind of pose it however you want, and then you can draw off of it in the same way that you draw off of a photo. You basically just create a new layer on top of it. You can lower the opacity, and then you can just draw on top of it like you would for a actual photo. It's already broken down into basic shapes, sort of, which makes it a little bit easier, but I don't like to completely follow the anatomy of these guides because they're a little too, like, just not quite in my style. So I usually will very roughly sketch over them in order to figure out stuff like my anatomy and my general positioning of where pieces should go, and then I'll go in myself and sort of change it afterwards. Like, for example, I really don't like the way that these 3D models do the character's chest. There's not a lot of customization in like chest shape and size when it comes to these models. A lot of the stuff is customizable, like, oh, the width of your hips or the length of your arms, or, you know, how muscular the character is or whatever. But a lot of the stuff, like the individual size of individual parts, is not very customizable. So if you have a character with like an alternative body shape, like, for example, a lot of my feminine characters are very curvy, you won't be able to get that very well in the models, and so I usually, instead of drawing like directly off of it like this, if you want to exaggerate your anatomy, you can still use the models, but you can kind of just take it in yourself and mess with stuff however you want. It really doesn't matter. There are no rules. Do with the models as you wish. But you can still use these the same way you'd use a photo. I kind of like it because it has less visual noise there going on, and generally speaking, it's pretty easy to use these as like a little starting point, and then you can go back after. You can go back after and kind of do whatever you want with it. So that's how I use 3D models. Generally, you can kind of just use it to quickly bang out a pose, which I really like. It's pretty goated. I love that Clip Studio Paint lets you do that. It's really cool. So if you're not using Clip Studio Paint, you can use there's a bunch of like these 3D model websites that do the exact same thing. They're 3D posable dolls, and you can basically put it into the pose you want. You can take a picture, like a screenshot, and then you can bring your screenshot into Clip Studio and you could draw over it the same way you draw over a photo. So I just wanted to briefly mention how that works because it's very useful, especially if you can't find a reference for a very particular pose that you want, and you want to draw something like maybe you're having like you're drawing like a comic and you have like a very complicated thing with a bunch of characters interacting with their surroundings, and you can't really find a reference for that, and it's too difficult to freehand, or maybe you just want a really weird camera angle that's kind of hard to find art for. That is also something you can definitely do. I've used it for that many times, like POV stuff it's really helpful for. Plus like characters with props and stuff like that. So it's very good. I highly recommend it. I use it all the time in specifically character designs a lot of the time, for simple poses for your characters to be in when you draw out their full body stuff. So very helpful, very useful. I would recommend that. So now I'm going to get talking into hair guidelines, how you can create a hairstyle. So let's go. Alright, so now let's talk about the hair and how to break it up into different zones. You can pretty much draw any hairstyle you want if you break it up into chunks, and pretty much every hairstyle has a few basic pieces that you can kind of rearrange to get the desired effect. The best way to break it down is to break it into zones, and I've gone ahead and done that here. Now, this might look kind of confusing at first, but I promise it'll make sense once I show you some examples. So, basically, you have a few basic parts. Here, in red, you have your bangs. In green, you have extra hair in the front that could be used either to continue the bangs or to add a little extra fluff kind of going out on both sides of the head. The blue here will represent your fringe. The blue hair usually hangs down from here. Maybe it's used for face framing pieces, that sort of thing. The purple in the back here is your kind of back hair. This is stuff that won't take a lot of front space. Sometimes it's literally just flat if your character has like a ponytail or something, for example. And I didn't draw it here, but the other zone would be in the back of your head. I colored it yellow in some of the hairstyles that I drew for an example for this, but that would be like a ponytail. If you wanted to add something to the back of your character that sticks off of their head, like a bun or a ponytail, I would consider that its own zone. It's a whole different area of hair. But by knowing these different zones, by knowing your bangs, your fringe, the hair in the back, that sort of thing, you can pretty much craft whatever hairstyle that you want. I made a couple, for example, you see here I have my front bangs, I have these supporting little pieces here, the fringe that comes down and frames the face, the back, which is pulled back into this sort of bun thing, and then of course the back hair, which is sticking out of the back. Another example would be right here. I have this sort of longer, fluffier style. You can see here I forgoed one of the green supporting pieces in order to create a large asymmetrical bang on the side of the face. This hairstyle is pretty similar to the one that my character over here has, just without the ears. Very similar, kind of bob with a nice little kind of emo bang here. But you can see the fringe, it's a different shape, but it's still the fringe. It still goes around, along the side of the face to frame it. Here you can see it tucks inwards and actually overlaps the face as well. I did mess up here and draw a little above my hairline, just ignore that. I was just trying to get some hairstyles out. Generally speaking, you know, the back here is just kind of fluffy. It's in the back. It's not really in the front with where most of the shape is. I also tried drawing a shorter hairstyle here to kind of show how it would work on shorter hair. You know, you still have all the different pieces. The fringe is much shorter because the hair is shorter. The back kind of sticks out from behind the neck a little bit and then just kind of follows the curvature of the head with some little fluffs. And then I had a little, I think it's called a hoagie. He's got one of those little things on his head. So generally speaking, that's kind of how I do it. Now, when it comes to the actual shapes and the stuff that you do to draw hair, that can also be broken down. So now that we understand our basic zones, which if you ever need guidelines for hair, you can always draw a couple balls. You have your bangs, you have the side hair, the fringe, which would go down along this sort of sideburn area, and then the rest you can fill in from there. Sometimes I'll add these before drawing a hairstyle on my character. So generally when you're drawing hair, this heavily depends on art style. Hair is one of the most unique things about an art style, but generally if you're going for a more anime style, which is obviously kind of what my tutorials are geared for, there's a few basic things that you can do. I like to have these sort of fluffy pieces, which is basically just like a V shape, but it's a little curved, and I like to kind of stack these up. So for example, I might bring a little hair down, kind of make it go in a little bit before bringing it back down again, and then in a little bit, and then back down again. And basically all that is a round shape with some sort of little V's carved into it, and then some extras. And you can even add a couple extra little things in there if you like a fluffier texture. I like big chunky hair. That's like a definite change to my art style. I also like when you have it follow this sort of curve. It makes it look a lot fluffier. I like to extend some right off the side of the head to give it kind of a fluffy look. But generally speaking, it's just a lot of, these little spiky shapes, and I'll sort of follow this curvature with them, and just a lot of big spikes, a lot of fluffy pieces. This will be very hard to do if you don't know the kind of style you're looking for, but again, it's those basic pieces. You have the bangs, the side stuff, you have the fringe here. I like to bring a little fringe down. I like these little hanging bits here. Most of my characters have them. And then the back you can kind of do whatever you want with. I kind of follow the actual curvature of the head, like so. I'll make it a little above the skull, and then I'll usually add some little fluffs going here. I like this thing where you go up and then down, and then you go up again. It's a really nice way to make very basic fluffy shapes, I found, for hair. A lot of my characters that have huge fluffy heads of hair, I use this trick a lot to just give it a big chunky shape. Sometimes I'll have a little hair that comes forward and overlaps with the head, and I just kind of tuck it kind of like that over the shoulder. That gives it a nice look where it's kind of coming over the shoulders a little bit. I might add more right like that. But generally speaking, you just kind of follow the curve of the head, add some little fluffs. At least this is how I do it. There are other ways to draw hair as well. Another common way is to have straighter shapes like so, and then cut little kind of ridges into it. You can also just draw out the shapes first. Like if you like straight hair with straight bangs rather than fluffy curly hair, you can kind of do this, carve some little shapes into it, and get this nice sort of straight edge. Bangs. This is used a lot in anime as well for characters with straight hair, especially for long flowing strands. If your character has really long pieces, you can get kind of creative with this, use some sharper edges and stuff like that. But generally, this is kind of how a lot of anime hair is drawn. You can definitely experiment more with your shapes and get really funky with it. They might add a couple little extra strands coming off, like this little fang shaped things, those little spikes, kind of adding some little extra something there. But a lot of the time it's still the same zones, it's just different shapes. It's more boxy, and obviously you can go from there, have really long strands or however you want to do that. This is just another way that you can do it. If you like a straighter hair, obviously this should be a bit larger off the head so it doesn't look as suction cup to the skull, but you can see what I'm going for here. It's all the same zones. It's still those, the front part, the side parts. You can pretty much make any hairstyle you want with that, unless it's something that's really crazy. Also, like, if your character has a natural part, you can use this natural line from your guidelines to kind of figure that out. I usually just draw a part as like a little squiggle like that, because that's how I have a center part and mine goes back and forth like that, so pretty normal. But that's generally how I structure hair. It's a lot less complicated than it looks. It's just like experimenting, figuring out how you want it to look. You can definitely use other hairstyles as a reference. Even just playing around with the shapes, like seeing the kind of shapes that you like. I'll go ahead and I'll doodle my character's hair over here, because this model is a little complex compared to how I draw her sometimes, but her hair is very simple. It tucks just a little bit like this, and then it goes into these sort of waves, sort of even. And then I have my little side piece right here. It goes over the side of the head, and then her fringe actually tucks. Her front hair's tucked into the fringe a little bit. Don't be afraid to use your eraser to get some unique shapes in there. And if it doesn't look super realistic, who fucking cares? It doesn't have to be realistic. That's the fun thing about stylized art, especially. You can do whatever the hell you want. You don't have to follow the laws of physics. You can have the 90s to early 2000s anime hair where it's just gigantic spikes with no actual form to them, and it will still read as hair. It's very fun. Like, you can do whatever the hell you want with it. It's pretty sick. I'll do some slightly more complex shapes here. And then her ears are actually like cat ears. My little PNG tuber here, she's a shapeshifter, but this form that I usually draw her in, she's like a cat shark. So she's got these sort of long, downturned cat ears that are part of her hair, sort of. They are functional ears. They're just, I have to put them into the hairstyle. It's important. I've drawn her many times, so I can usually bang her out pretty quick. It doesn't take long. It's not quite as sharp as I like it. She's got this sort of bob, and then she has the two little things on the top of her head. You can bring some of these lines up to make it look a bit more full instead of like it's fully in the back. But generally speaking, I mean, that's kind of it. You just really, you have those basic forms down still. Like, she's still got this front bang, she's got the side, she's got the ridges, or the fringe that goes down this way, and then the back hair. And it looks a lot more complicated than it is. But that's basically it. I mean, once you learn how to do the shapes, obviously that takes a bit longer to learn, but once you experiment with it, you'll get it pretty quickly. Once you understand just the zones of the hair, I think you can make pretty much any haircut work without trying to if you're doing it in zones, it's a lot easier than doing like this, and trying to make it look good, because it's gonna be weird, like it's just gonna look strange compared to if you use like that nice shape language. You can get that stylized anime hair a lot better, especially because the style uses some really unique haircuts and like hair pieces and stuff like that. So you can definitely do a lot with that. But that's basically how the hair works. I just wanted to break that down a little bit because that's something I haven't touched on, even with friends I've done tutorials with when it comes to like hair zones. You can use a lot of like color-coded zones if it helps you draw certain things, especially with digital, since it's just a layer that you can toggle off whenever you want. Just being able to visualize it really helps, for sure. That should definitely be a big help. So next we'll be moving on to clothes, and to do that I will be moving back to our little drawing that we did. Well, actually I think I got rid of the drawing that we did. I guess I'll make another one, actually. Okay. I'm gonna whip up some guidelines really quick, and then we'll go from there. I'll see you then. Okay, so I went back and I redid this. It's gonna look different from before because I did have to redo it. I'm a fool, I drew over it, but it's the same thing as before. I just whipped through it really fast. The first thing I'm going to talk about is actually how to clean up this to use for your drawing a little bit better. So you could technically draw directly over this, but if you are going to have a lot of skin showing, or even if you just have like parts that you want to be a little more refined before you go in, and just have a sort of like basic sort of Ken doll anatomy kind of nude person to work with, I would definitely erase some of the lines you don't need anymore. Like for example, the ball that we drew around the waist can be erased now. You can clean up the the connectors between the arms and like the chest. You can sort of erase your balls for your shoulders, this little line here. And we'll actually add some things now that those are cleaned up just to make it look a little nicer. We can also erase sort of this because we'll redraw that crotch line just to make it look a little nicer. Get rid of some of the stuff around the knees, that sort of thing, until we're left with this sort of nice base model. If we want to add a little more detail, we can also add things like the midline for the stomach, and then of course we can go back in and we can fix the crotch line for, if we want to give her some pants or something. I like to add in a little bit more overlap with the arms, that sort of thing. And then I like to add a little collarbone that just kind of follows this line between the two shoulders. And then I also added a little bit more detail to the chest in case we want to do something with that. I don't know what kind of outfit I'm gonna put her in, so we're just gonna freeball it. Hell yeah. But generally speaking, this is a really good starting point for drawing clothes. So now we're finally going to get rid of our old reference, and we have a nice clean body here to work with. I'm not going to bother doing a face and hair because that's not the focus of this area. So generally, starting clothes, it is good to get a reference for outfits if you want one, if you're trying to get a specific look down. But if you don't really care and you just kind of want to experiment, I will show you some of the things that you can do to draw various articles of clothing. Yeah, let's just jump right into it. So I'm going to go ahead and lower the opacity on this, and we'll be drawing on top of it with some black so you can see it pretty clearly. So I think I'm going to put this character in like some shorts, and it'll probably be similar to the outfit she was already wearing, just because I want to show you some different ways that you can draw like tight clothing versus loose clothing, tight sleeves versus puffy sleeves, loose pants, maybe some skirts. I'll do some like different clothes just to show you some examples of things. So the first thing I'll be doing is drawing like a tighter sort of crop top like she was already wearing, just because it's very simple. I'll be following this neckline to sort of create my head hole thing. Usually that's like a collar, so it's a little double-sided. This is going to be sketchy and messy, but don't worry about it. So, you can follow because it's going to be tight, you can pretty much just follow the lines of your shoulders directly, because it's going to be kind of, if you look at someone wearing a tight shirt, usually around the shoulders, it's pretty one-to-one for their arms. And then you can kind of end it around here. Now, what I like to do to spruce this up a little, so it's not just nice and, like glued to the skin, I actually like to erase a little bit up here, and I like to add some wrinkles. And I basically just create like a little accordion shape right here, and then I'll drag a line across, and I'll usually have one going the other way too. This is just kind of how I will add some quick wrinkles to areas that would be a little bunched up. Now, wrinkles are something we're definitely going to be talking about during this section, because it is something that a lot of people ask me about. When you're creating wrinkles, it's another thing you kind of just have to visualize, because if you're not drawing directly from a reference, like you're doing a study, you will just have to kind of visualize how things would bunch up. Like for example, here on most shirts, there's a seam where the shoulder, like the torso piece and the arms will connect, like the sleeves. What I like to do is I like to go right in that connector and add a couple little scrunchy bunchies there. So you know, along where this, you see this line here where the chest connects, like here, you can kind of tuck it in there like it would be in real life, because obviously that chest is going to be coming outwards a bit. You can even have some of that collar showing, you know, you can have it sticking through if you want. So the way that people draw clothes around a chest is kind of funny, because a lot of people don't seem to understand how boobs work and how clothing around them works. I guess it depends on what they're wearing. I mean, if you're wearing like, see, I'll just explain it. A common thing I see people doing is they do this line that goes straight across the chest like this, and then they'll continue the shirt down from there. Unless you literally tuck your shirt underneath your boobs and like hold it there, it's never going to be like suctioned to the underside. Like this right here, you'll never see this line unless it is like tucked underneath. Like if you were only wearing that, you had like a tiny little bit showing there, you might tuck it under to make it fit, but most of the time you're not going to see that. More realistically, what would end up happening is that at the highest point of the chest, like the point that sticks out the most, which would be right here, instead of going back down and under, it would actually just continue straight down like this. This is kind of like a more realistic shape, or something like more realistically how cloth sits on a shape. It goes straight down, and then maybe, you know, you have a little bunching there. And I'm going to end it around right here. You can just bring it right across. Have a little bit of that scrunchy bunch in there. But, you know, if you look at this, it looks a lot more realistic. Like the way that the cloth, if we remove our reference here, the way that the cloth rests on the chest and then continues to go down instead of, you know, ducking under the chest. It's less emphasis on the shape of the breasts, which is appealing to some people, but it just doesn't make a lot of sense. If you want to, you can add in some extra folds here, just some straight lines from where the sort of like the chest is joined. You can also add some more showing how the cloth is kind of dragging downwards, that sort of thing. You can add a little bit of curvature, just don't like completely, you know, complete it. You can also add some little folds here that would show where it dips into the chest, because you see how the chest is like this, right? Well, that cloth would kind of dip under into that crevice a little bit, so you can add a little bit of just a little sort of stuff there. Now if you remove that, this looks pretty good. Like maybe right here could use some work down here, but you know, showing how it sits over the chest, it's not glued to it, it's not suctioned to it. Unless your character is wearing like a skin tight bodysuit, you're probably not going to get like the underside of the chest showing, just because cloth sits on top of that and because of how gravity affects it, right? We can go ahead and we can kind of just roughly shade some of these in so you can see the difference. But yeah, that's pretty much it for a shirt right there. You don't have to do much more than that. After that, we can move on to pants. Pants are very simple. I'm going to do some like shorts that are tight as well, just for the sake of this. This can come up as high as you want. I guess I'll go like mid. You could even do high shorts. That'll look kind of silly though. I'll go lower. That's fine. Just kind of bring it across. Make sure you're curving it. Don't make it a straight line. You want to follow the body's natural curvature, where it would sort of curve forward on a actual body here, and then you can kind of just follow your lines down. For tight pants, there's a lot less of that like cloth draping, because it is your legs are just shaped in a way where there's not a lot of hanging stuff. If it's like tight, like think of like a girl in like yoga pants, like you can kind of see everything. Like you know what I mean? It's just the way that it fabric hugs those shapes, like cylindrical shapes. It tends to not drape as much. do some like pants things to the top of these, I guess. But they kind of look like boxers. Just ignore that. Make sure your leg kind of overlaps here. Yeah, just some like shorts, I guess. So this is like, I'd say, a tighter outfit. If you wanted to go with something more loose, I'll show how to do that next. So we can kind of do the same thing. I'm going to go ahead, and this time I'm going to give her one of my absolute favorites, which is a sweater with some puffy sleeves. I draw that so often. It's one of my favorites. So first I'll create the lines for the sleeves here, and sweater sleeves have this sort of cuff to them. I like to create this sort of puffed shape and sort of bring it around like where the cuffs would be. And then you can add some little lines, because they usually have these like little elastic sewing line things. You can add a little thing to those if you want. Now you can also add one if you like a turtleneck. You can kind of do the same thing. This is not gonna make a lot of sense with the physics, just ignore that. Yeah, give them like a little turtleneck there, and you can add in some more little things for the chest dip or whatever. Same deal as the shirt. The top should always be pretty snug. This area will never be like super baggy up here because of how the gravity affects it. It pulls it down against the skin. But once you get to the sleeves, then you can have a bit more fun. So what I like to do with puffy sleeves is I'll start with like a small wrinkle here, but then I'll give it a nice big round puff, sort of like you'd see in a big puffy jacket. And then here in the crevice of the elbow, like the inner elbow part, it would have more of a sort of, it's kind of pinched together there because of how the fabric would be. And you can get some nice big old shapes there, kind of just this big puffy, baggy sort of sleeve like this. I don't know what that line is for. It looks a lot more complicated than it is. It's just a lot of like thinking about how the fabric would rest on the body. More realistically, it would probably come down more on the other side. I just kind of wanted to try making it puffy on the top as well. It doesn't always have to make sense. Like if it looks better the other way, just do it the other way. No one cares. No one's going to pay attention. I don't think people who are looking at your art are going to be like, that doesn't seem quite right. Most people don't give a fuck, I promise you. But you can do the same thing on the other side. It's narrower here because this is where it would cinch back down to the wrist area. See here, because her arm isn't bent as much, there's not going to be as much of a cinch here, but I'll add a little bit just for some visual flair, I suppose. But yeah, you get some nice puffy sleeves. We'll be doing something very similar with the chest that we did in the last one. It'll kind of come around these bends and then go down. With a longer thing, I like to, that line where it goes down, I like to bring it down a lot farther. And then around the dip in the hips, I like to add a little bit of kind of sort of squishy cinching there for some folds. And then you can bring it down further if you want. Add a little, or kind of raise it up a little higher. But I'll add another cuff down here for the end of the sweater. Get that nice like cartoonish sweater hem. It's very cute. I like doing sweaters like that. This is a Nova staple right here. Actually, the character on the side of my screen, my PNG tuber, usually has a sweater like this. But I wanted to draw her in an off-the-shoulder thing for the PNG tuber model. Usually when I draw her, though, she's got a sweater like this. But yeah, you can see it definitely looks like a sweater. It's really, it's not as complicated as it sounds. It's really just thinking about how, like, have you ever seen those like Blender cloth simulation videos where they're like dropping a cloth over like a 3D object in Blender and it's like has that physics simulation on it? You're kind of imagining something like that, but on your 3D object that you're drawing, just like how the fabric would drape off of things, how it would cinch together in like tight spots, following the curvature of the body and thinking like, where does it squish inwards? Where would it get ruffled? what areas have droop in them that would have some like nice little drape, like wrinkles in the fabric where it would kind of be shifting, that sort of thing. There's a lot that you can put into it, but you can get a pretty nice result a lot of the time if you just do something like that. For baggy pants is kind of the same thing. Usually, no matter how baggy your pants are, you can kind of start with the crotch line, which will usually go across. The baggier the pants, the lower that cross line will be. Instead of being like way up here, it's like down here a little bit more. I'm gonna give her some like stupid bell bottoms or something. Pants, usually less interesting than like a top would be. You're just kind of following the shape of the legs. Usually legs are pretty straight. You won't have too much wrinkling, but you're just kind of following that basic shape. Add like a weird little slit in them, I guess. I don't know. I don't really know what I'm doing here. And, the baggier something is, generally the more boxy it will be, especially around the pants. You'll have less of this, like, thigh curve the baggier it is, so it'll be more stiff and rectangular. That's generally the way to do it. I didn't make these very baggy around the top, but usually when you give something like that curve, like this upper leg curve, it gives it more of a feminine look. Again, you can do it on male characters too. Male characters can have thighs and hips and curves, but generally it kind of reads that way because that's more popular in like women's fashion. You'll see a lot of the time it kind of accentuates the thigh shape for a lot of pants specifically, because your thighs tend to be a little thicker on like AFAB people. Just on average, it's not always that way, obviously, but fabric tends to hug there and then get looser down low where your legs are skinnier, because the fabric is usually, unless it's like leggings, it's a uniform width. So like your pant leg, right, is like this. It's the same width all the way down, but your leg shape is different. So like your thigh takes up more space up here, but as your leg gets smaller as it goes down, this part is more baggy and this part's more like glued to your upper leg just because it's stretching it out more. So that's kind of basically how you can draw clothes on a character. You can do this with pretty much anything you want. It's really just imagining how the cloth would fit on the 3D object. I'm not sure how to really explain it any better than that. If you want to practice things like folds, one thing that you can definitely do is getting a picture of some like fabric on like Google and try drawing it from that. That way you can learn how things like cinch together, how fabric can be like draped over objects. But you can also try just like freehand drawing up some like drapey fabric. You can definitely like experiment with how things would be bunched together in some spots and how it would drape in other spots, and just kind of get funky with it. Like really, it's a lot of fabric is just like, if it makes vague sense, people will probably think it's realistic. It doesn't have to be like perfectly simulated. Most people just aren't gonna know. They're not gonna care. You can kind of get away with bullshitting it a little bit, but as long as you're following like the curves of the body, you're following the gravity, like how it would be hung down, how it would be like weighed down by gravity, and how things would sort of flop over and bunch together and all that. As long as you're following those things, you can kind of do whatever you want for clothes. You can definitely, get better at it. Definitely use references if you're not sure. If you have like a photo, you can always follow the folds that are on the actual photograph. I've once again removed our photograph from the stupid canvas, so I can't show you that, but there was like almost no folds on the photo anyway. Either way, it's definitely something that you can get better at. It's something that you should definitely be practicing. I'd say drawing like baggy clothes is a good way to practice it, even if you don't want to just do studies, because again, my whole thing is I want to prevent you from doing too many studies and getting like sick of art, because that's really sad. If all you do is study, you're not going to want to draw. That's just, at least for most people don't like that. So, practice by drawing some of your favorite characters and new outfits or something like that. There's definitely a lot that you can do. Try drawing from photos. but using like characters you liked, but like still try to emulate like the outfit or the folds in the outfit or the gravity of like how the cloth is affected, all that stuff. Those are all things that you can do while having fun. That's definitely worth it. So I've pretty much, broken down all the basic parts. Now all you really have to do is put it all together, like finding your reference image, using your guidelines, until you've created a body, switching the reference image off, drawing your clothes over your base that you've kind of created for yourself, drawing your hair using, breaking it up into zones, creating a hairstyle. You can find a lot of references for that in artwork as well. Drawing your face using your face guidelines. And then, once you clean all your guidelines up, you kind of have a full drawing. You're done. I mean, of course you could paint it and everything, and I won't be going over painting in this video. I'll probably make a separate video about painting because I'm more of a drawing guy. I'm not a big painting guy. I'm not the best at it, especially with like colors and stuff. I'm not very good at that, but I can show you like the basic techniques and the stages of painting, at least, because I do paint a little bit, obviously for work a lot, and I've made my PNG tuber here, and I've made many paintings in my day. Either way, these are definitely just the basics of drawing. I'm not going to go over shading in this video, but next up in this video, I'll be talking about ways that you can continue to study and improve, and things that you should avoid to avoid stunting your growth and stuff like that. Let's go ahead and talk about how to study further after this video, how to keep up with your improvement, stuff about art styles and all that. So let's go ahead and talk about that now. Okay, so now the drawing portion of this video is over, and now it's time for me to yap at you about some concepts and stuff I did and didn't talk about. I'm looking at my script and I realized that there are some things that I just really couldn't explain to you while I was drawing because they're a bit more complex than I could just drop in the middle of a doodling segment. So I'll mention them briefly. Proportion is a big thing that I did not touch on. How to do correct proportions, quote unquote. And the main reason I didn't really go over proportions is because proportions really depends on your art style. And I really wanted to wait until the section where I talked about art styles to get into that, and that is right now. So let's get into talking a little bit about art styles, because art styles are really what separates artists from each other, obviously, and it also dictates the way that you draw. And a lot of people don't know how you obtain an art style, how you pick one. I see people asking all the time, how do I find my art style, that kind of thing. So I just wanted to talk about it a little bit as someone whose art style is pretty distinct, I feel like. Let's go ahead and talk about that. So your art style is something that's completely unique to you. Your art style will usually take on aspects of other people's art styles that you see and you want to kind of emulate, and you'll end up sort of like Frankensteining a bunch of stuff together over time. That's usually how an art style will develop. You don't just like sit down and go, I'm going to define my art style and completely draw something out from scratch in like a completely new and unique style. That's usually not how it happens. For me, my art styles evolved alongside me as my skill grew, and I've definitely taken things from a bunch of different creators. The way I draw hair, the way I draw eyes, the way I draw mouths, how I do my anatomy, how I do my guidelines, the way that I draw clothes, the way I render. All those are things that you pick up from all over the place. So for example, if you want to draw like one specific artist, you're probably going to have a really hard time. But if you adopt specific things like, oh, I like the way that this artist draws their eyebrows or their eyelashes or noses, you can adopt that into your art style in a way that feels organic. And you can kind of mix and match until you have something that's unique to you that you really like. Like you like all the different elements of it, they work well together, and you can create something new and unique that way. I find that sometimes artists have styles that look way too similar to each other because they're trying to copy other artists that they like instead of creating their own art style by taking bits and pieces from all over. Generally speaking, the best way to grow in your own style is to just experiment. If you see specific things you like, try just copying those instead of a person's entire style, because you want to be original and you want to find ways to express yourself with your artwork and, the things that you like, crafting your own aesthetic, that sort of thing. These are all very important things that will definitely, come over time as you work more. But there's a few general, there's a few categories that art styles fall into, and the type of art that you make usually will fall into one of the three. Sorry, I'm struggling to think about how to word this. So generally, all art, no matter who's drawing it, what art style you're in, falls into one of three categories, I would say. A lot of art styles are realistic art styles. So you have realism. If you've ever seen, those old Renaissance painting portraits of people, or those people who can sit down and draw like hyper realistic portraits that you don't even know are painted, or even if you just like drawing pretty realistic looking people, like they have very normal human features, all the different curves of the face, realistic eyes, lips, noses. You don't stylize anything, so all the anatomy is completely accurate to real life in your proportions. Doing like the heads to body trick, making sure things aren't too big, making sure your eyes are spaced apart, making sure, you're able to do different features, realistic hair, all your rendering, like all those things are hallmarks of a realistic style. Obviously, pretty straightforward with that one. It's definitely the easiest to identify. It's just people who want to draw, people that look like real people, like as much as possible. When you get into semi-realistic art styles, that's where things get really varied. I would say that a lot of anime falls into the semi-realistic style, especially now. Like modern anime is definitely more leaning that way rather than like the early 2000s to like 90s anime, where you had a lot of like big giant spiky hair and huge eyes and like these really like tiny skinny characters and stuff. Like these days I feel like a lot of like big anime has more of a like semi-realistic style rather than like a full cartoonish style, especially some of the popular ones. Like if you think of any artwork by like Junji Ito is very like semi-realistic. Stuff by like Fujimoto, like Chainsaw Man, very like, semi-realistic there, like very realistic like bodies and stuff, but you still have those stylized faces, but like the proportions are very grounded. That's definitely like the kind of style that I think of when I think of semi-realistic. A Western example of that would be some of the like adult animated cartoons that we have now, specifically like the superhero ones and some of the like more stylized ones that are meant to look more like anime. A good example that's very popular would be like Invincible. I would say that show and a lot of similar ones like Creature Commandos, stuff like that, when they draw human characters, they're pretty grounded in reality. Like they have a distinct nose, they have like somewhat realistic eyes, lips, they have, the ears, the head to body ratio is pretty normal. But they can also go more stylized with it. Like a lot of times you have these really muscular characters with like biceps the size of their head or whatever. Or, characters who are usually the women in these shows aren't too absurdly proportioned, but a lot of times you have these big buff giant dudes. Just stuff like that. Like you can definitely get like freaky with it without it being like absurdist. You can exaggerate certain things while still remaining relatively realistic, like having identifiable features. And then on the other end of the spectrum, completely from realism, is the cartoonish art style, where it's completely not realistic and you're not aiming to make it realistic. Like the features are still identifiable. You can still tell what's the eyes, what's the nose, what's the mouth, but there's no real eyes, nose, or mouth that look like that. Like, for example, this is really popular with like, obviously like Western cartoons, like, early 2000s Cartoon Network cartoons, or like SpongeBob, or like the really popular stuff that a lot of kids watch. This is more, appealing to kids, but also stuff like, vintage Disney does this, even some modern Disney does this. A lot of anthro and like furry stuff will fall into this category. Just very cartoonish, very sort of mascot like. You'll see this a lot in people that are big fans of like Disney, or big fans of like those adult animated shows like Family Guy or like The Simpsons. Just this very like cartoonish style that you can definitely still do. You know, no matter what you're doing, some laws are universal. You'll always have to use guidelines, like, you know, figuring out where to put stuff on the face. That's the same if you're drawing like a hyper realistic like Instagram model, or if you're drawing fucking Homer Simpson. Like, it doesn't matter. You're still gonna have to use guidelines. You're still gonna have to know like how to proportion things, that sort of thing. Like, the things that I've taught you can apply to all the art styles that you can think of. Even if your characters are made out of very simple shapes, which are very appealing to a lot of young people. Like, I think of a lot of sort of amateur artwork where the characters have like perfect circle tool heads and like very chunky limbs, and things made out of a lot more like clear shapes that are easy to draw. And I think that style is very, very unique. I actually really like it, but it's also very easy to draw. So for a lot of people who are just starting out, that tends to be what they gravitate towards, because it's you know, you can have like simple, clean, nice looking character designs while also having them be drawable by a larger audience, because they're pretty simple and it's easier for you to do, like just bang them out, because, you know, it's just a lot of simple shapes. The more realistic the style is, the more complex the shapes get, you know, the more difficult everything is, the more stylized you are. It can be either easier or harder depending on how you do it. Like, some stylized work is honestly, I feel like, harder than realism, because it's just so, like, you don't have a lot to go off of. Like, when you're working with hyperrealism, you can just look at a photo and like perfectly recreate that photo, and that does take a lot of skill, but you don't have to make these like creative liberties and try to create all these things that you don't have a reference for, that you just have to like hope looks right and just make up as you go and hope that it reads. It's not uncanny, that it's like appealing. Like, that can be harder sometimes than drawing like hyper realism, I feel like. I'm not a realism artist. I can't draw realism. But it's not me talking out of my ass. I promise this is like a thing. Like, if you have a realism artist and you ask them to draw an anime girl, it's not going to look like anime. It's just not, because they're two fundamentally different things. And if you ask an anime artist to draw realism, they probably won't be able to do that either, at least not to the same level. They might get kind of close, but it's going to be that like pseudo semi-realism, probably. So they're two different worlds, two different ends of the spectrum for sure. I will not be able to teach you guys about realism here. That's not the kind of artist that I am. I mean, obviously, look at the fucking person talking to you right now. But this is definitely... I am fully on board for things like exaggerating proportions, obviously, to get a certain effect, or just like for aesthetic reasons. I don't think that there's any one correct way to draw anatomy. I see a lot of like weird art purists on the internet who are like, that's not realistic, or like, that's wrong. It's like just a basic stylistic choice. Like, it kind of pisses me off, to be honest. I see it a lot in people critiquing anime and people critiquing characters who are like curvy, but being like, real women don't look like that or whatever, even though characters who have a large bust and a curvy body shape absolutely do exist. I would know, because I'm one of them. Like, my persona is very curvy because I'm curvy in real life, and I like to have a curvy character to represent myself because it's very validating to me. It's not all just goonery. I feel like there's a lot of this weird like anti like hot characterism out on the internet right now. There's a very like big Puritan culture thing happening where a lot of characters who have like a sexy design are just like completely dehumanized, and people who draw them are just like completely written off as like weird like sexist gooners and like porn addicts. When it's definitely not like that at all. Like, you can have a character with big boobs and it not, you know, you're not like absolutely jorking it 50,000 times a day. It's really stupid. Like, don't be afraid to mess with your proportions, to get funky with it. It doesn't even have to be for sexual reasons. You can just have fun. I definitely do. I am literally asexual. Just to be clear. I like drawing big curvy shapes. It's fun. I am a large-chested person. I like drawing big boobs. It's just me having fun. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not incorrect. There's no incorrect way to make art, and people who tell you otherwise are not very smart, or they're not artists, or they're not good artists. Like, for sure. You know, I'm definitely not the most talented artist out there. I'm like intermediate, maybe on the upper end of that at most. You know, I'm not completely qualified to say if something is good or bad, because I feel like my critique is different from my skill. Art critique is its own skill. It's not as easy as, you know, just drawing. I guess. I don't know. It's harder for me, I think. I'm very picky with art, though. Like, the art that I enjoy, the art styles I like. That's just me. I'm kind of rambling at this point. But my point is, there's no correct way to draw. There's no correct art style. You don't have to be realistic. You can exaggerate whatever the hell you want. You can draw hyper booby anime women all you want. It doesn't matter. No one fucking cares. If people care, that's their problem. You should create what you want to create, even if it's not everyone's cup of tea, even if it's adult, or it's, you know, as long as you're 18, to clarify. You should not be creating adult art if you are not of age, because that's fucking bad. But generally speaking, if you're an adult, just have fun. Like, one, if you're not an adult, please don't watch my channel, because fucking look at me, dude. This is not for kids. But, you know, my point is, if you're an adult, you know, who fucking cares? Like, just do your thing. Develop your art style over time. Don't be afraid to push stuff. Don't be afraid to get crazy with it. You know, if that's what you like, go for it. If you don't like that, don't make it someone else's problem, obviously. I'm not looking forward to if these videos get more views and people are commenting like, oh my god, why do you look like that? That's the part that I don't like about making videos, because people are annoying about curvy women, but whatever. Anyway, where, like, when it comes to proportions and stuff like that, it depends on the art style. I can't really help with most art styles because it's up to individual preference, and I'm not a realism artist, so like anything that's too realistic I just can't really help with. That's definitely not what I've sort of put my skill points into, relatively speaking. So I won't be able to help with that much, but there's definitely a lot of guides out there, and a really good way that you can learn about proportion and decide how you want to do proportions, especially with things like faces, is art studies, which is something that I'll talk about now, because I want to talk a little bit more about how you can continue to study and sort of level up your art skills passively over time as you are, you know, drawing just whatever, without having to do like dedicated hours and hours of drawing boxes, or like drawing straight lines to work on your line art, or, you know, drawing heads from 50 different angles or whatever. A really fun way to learn how to draw like the artists that you like, even if you're not directly copying their style, is to break down their art. So like, you know how we took the photo of the real lady and we broke it down into all these basic shapes, and then we drew like a thing out of those shapes? You can do that with other art that you like. Like, you can take other people's art and you can break it down just like on your own and like study it, like study how they proportion their faces, draw guidelines around their facial features, figure out how they draw certain things by sort of tracing over them. This isn't something you'd post, by the way. This is just like for you, for your studying, essentially. And you can kind of figure out like how they've done certain things so you can learn how to apply it to your own art. Like, one thing that I did about a year and a half ago or so, maybe like 2 years ago now, was I completely changed the way that I do faces, because I was drawing heads in a weird way where my eyes were like way too big, and my facial features took up so much of the head that there wasn't really a lot of room for like detailed hair, because no matter how I drew the hair, like any kind of bangs, it covered up the entirety of the facial features, and especially on like masculine characters, it just didn't look right. And so what I ended up doing was I took a bunch of fan art from artists that I really like, of like a bunch of handsome guys that I kind of wanted to learn how to like draw similar characters. I'm like, why doesn't my art look like that? I'm doing similar things. But it turns out my problem was my proportions. My proportions were too big on the face. And so what I did was I traced over their artwork, and I figured out how they spaced things apart. I drew guidelines around them to see how I would have to change my guidelines to draw something similar. And a big change that I did was drawing my eyes smaller. Making my eyes smaller literally changed the entire face. And once I started doing that, my art got better, like drastically. Because it was a big change, there was like an ugly period where I had to like figure out how to do it without it being like ugly. But once I got over that, it was like a drastic improvement. So definitely don't be afraid to study other people's art styles if there's something really specific that you want to emulate, like face proportions or whatever, or even things like eyes. Like there's a lot of different ways to draw eyes, especially in the anime style. There's like they can be very expressive and colorful and have really interesting shapes. You can totally like study that from other artists and apply like a similar rule to your work so that you can get a similar effect, and then work that into your art style. It's not like theft. Artists do it literally all the time. It's so common. Doing art studies is really good for you and your growth. I would heavily recommend that you do art studies. You can also do it for things like painting and rendering. Like some artists have really cool uses of like colors and stuff. You can try to paint something in a similar style. Again, I don't really recommend that you post these because you are using someone else's work like directly, and not everyone gives permission for that kind of thing. It might look like you're copying if you post studies and don't like explain that they're studies and get permission. So if this is something you do, I would definitely just do it on your own time. Don't post it online. Just kind of make it, a personal studying thing, the same way you'd study like any skill. You don't just post like your homework online or whatever. That'd be weird. Definitely, like that's definitely something you can do. And it's very good. It's a very good habit to pick up. Learning how other artists draw, what they draw, can definitely help you with your own drawings. Even if they don't have like tutorials out there, you don't have to follow other people's tutorials. You don't have to follow my tutorials. Like, this is just general advice. But art studies is a great way to continue practicing on your own time once you're done watching tutorials and stuff, if you want to continue to learn, and especially learn quickly. Pretty much all of my big art breakthroughs have been through art studies, and so I heavily recommend it if you're looking to change big parts of your style. And also just to develop your style. Like, doing stuff like that can help you realize, like, oh, I really like the way that they did this specific element. Like, I kind of want to do that on my normal stuff. And then you can kind of take bits and pieces and Frankenstein it. So how you develop your art style is very much something that is parallel to your growth in general. So that's kind of the basics of everything I wanted to go over in this video. The next video will probably be about painting and rendering. It should be a shorter one. This video is probably very long. It took me a while to make. It's been like 2 months. I'd also love to talk more about stuff like foreshortening, backgrounds, other stuff like that in the future, so you can look forward to those eventually when I can get around to them. But that's it for this video, and I'd like to thank everybody very much for watching. I know this is probably a long fucking video. I have no idea how long it is yet. I'm still recording it right now at my desk at 9 p.m. and I'm like, oh god, this is gonna be such a long video. Like, oh no. I think I made a joke in the last one. I was like, oh, this video is gonna be 2 hours long, but it genuinely might be 2 hours long, so we'll see. Regardless, thank you for sticking through. If you did, I hope that this was helpful in some way. Even if you only watched certain portions, that's totally fine. Everyone's gonna need help with different things, so if you just want to watch like a specific portion of it, that's fine. I'll try to put in like timestamps for like the chapters thing on YouTube, I'm not actually sure how that works. So I have to figure that out. If it's not there, assume that I failed. But generally speaking, I keep saying that today. Thank you for coming, and I hope that this was helpful. I'm sorry it took so damn long. And I hope to see you again in the next one. And I hope you have a good day. Okay. Goodbye, everybody.